Okay. Live to the YouTube universe. Trustee Darkford will be along momentarily, so I will speak. So I would call to order this regular monthly meeting of the Village of Trumansburg Board of Trustees. Do we have any changes to the agenda? I feel like I do. So while we are vamping for Mr. Darfler's benefit, let me check. Tammy, we're all set for the 6th Thursday with the local law. Okay. Okay, so we don't have any changes, additions, or deletions to the agenda. Okay. Well, I'm sure Ben needs a recap of anything, then I'm sure we can get it to him. So Dwayne, I'll turn it over to you for our annual audit presentation.
Perfect. Few minutes this evening to review the results of the audit. You have in front of you draft.
Yes. Can you hit the microphone?
Yes.
Underneath. Okay, great. Okay. Well, it's mainly for the recording.
Okay, great. What you have in front of you tonight are draft presentations. There's still a few loose ends of time within the file, but the numbers that you see in front of you are good for finalization. So there are a couple of additional letters that we presented. I'm going to talk about those real quick, just a matter of while. The letter that's on top, the title on the first page says communication with those parties to the governance and the conclusion of the audit. That's what we commonly refer to as the communication letter. It mentions certain things that the board should be aware of at the conclusion of the audit process. This letter is mostly boilerplate language, nothing in here to be concerned about. No changes in the accounting standards during the audit. This year, we evaluate significant estimates that are part of the financial statements, as well as the underlying assumptions, and no concerns there. We review the footnotes, the financial statement disclosure. No concerns there, no difficulties and disagreements with management during the conduct of the audit. So nothing to be concerned about in that letter. The other letter that you have is a management comment letter. We use the comment letter to point out anything that we find during the audit process that we think the board should be aware of. And then we also use the comment letter to let you know about any upcoming changes in accounting standards, auditing standards, and that we should be aware of in a more global sense. There is one comment at the top of the second page. This is a continuing comment, although it's improved a lot and continue to improve in the current year. We continue to make some adjustments during the audit process related to accounts receivable. The normal process is that revenues are reported when money is received. And so annually there is a year-end process to record accounts receivable, things that haven't been received yet, but revenues that have been earned. So we continue to make that adjustment, but it continues to get smaller, and the process continues to get better. The bottom of the second page of the comment letter, there is reference to some upcoming changes in accounting standards. There are new statements on leases that are going to be effective next year. And then the statement on, subscription for computer-based software. Another year out, and then another year beyond that, a statement, updated out. So those are more just an awareness issue for you, so that you kind of know what's coming up and you're ready to, handle those things that come about. So that's the two additional letters, and then the rest of, the rest of the discussion about the financial statements themselves. You've got the down packet, we're planning an unmodified clean opinion on the financial statements. We believe that they're dated, and don't require any modifications. If you're not going to read through the entire thing, I encourage you, if nothing else, to read through the management, the stuff even analysis. That's a nice readable section. It gives you kind of a summary. It's mostly top level stuff. It's mostly government wide stuff. But it gives you a sense of where things are from a financial standpoint. That section begins on page 4 of the down packet, continues page 4I. Yeah, 4I is the last page. There's some nice charts and graphs in there that help give you a very condensed picture of the government-wide balance sheet, government-wide statement of activities, some nice charts that go kind of where the revenues come from, where the expenditures go. So some good information in there. The financial statements themselves begin on page 5. Page 5 and 6 are the government-wide presentations. We take all of the funds, put them together, include the village's capital assets, include the village's long-term debt, the village's share of the New York State pension system obligation. All of that is put together in that government-wide presentation. You'll see at the bottom of page 5 on that government-wide method, the village has total net position at the end of the year of roughly $10.7 million. Most of that is capital assets, almost $9 million of that total is the net investment in capital assets. Another roughly $2.3 million in restricted net assets, mostly through the accounts. And then the unrestricted number is a deficit of roughly $500,000. Page 6 notes that total net position increased during the year by about $500,000, $532,000. Again, that's on the government-wide basis. And then beginning on page 7 are the fund basis statements. These are the ones that you're more used to seeing on a regular monthly basis. The balance sheets for the funds, page 7, the statement of revenues, expenditures, and payments in fund balance, page 9. The fund basis, the total village's funds grew by about $650,000 for the year. Mostly in the general fund, and increased in general fund balance about $100,000. The water and sewer funds both had decreases. And then the ambulance fund had an increase. But again, in total, about $650,000 more in fund balance at the end of the year compared to the beginning of the year. The notes to the financial statements begin on page 11. There's a summary of significant accounting policy. Since these didn't really change very much, not much new information in there. I did want to point to a couple of the footnotes. Page 22 of the down packet. This is note 5, and this is on the village's capital assets. So this shows you all of the activity during the year. The village added capital assets of about $140,000 for new purchases. Depreciation expense during the year was about $780,000. So on a net basis, capital assets declined by about $640,000 during. Note 7 begins on the next page, that is a note on long-term debt. And if you turn to page 24, there's a couple of nice charts in here. The chart at the top of the page just lists the different bonds, leases outstanding, a total of about $7.3 million in long-term debt. And then right at the bottom of the page, the chart that just shows the activity for the year. And then one more chart in the middle of page 25 shows how that debt is scheduled to be paid off annual increments for the next 5 years, in 5-year increments beyond that, going all the way out to 2049, when the last payments are scheduled to be made. Beginning on the very next page is note 8 on the pension system. We talked a little bit about the pension system in the last few years. There's still relatively recent changes in accounting standards for how pensions are recorded in the government-wide statements. But one thing to note here, which is rather unusual, because the ERS investment systems did pretty well during the 21-22 state fiscal year. Instead of showing a pension liability, you're now showing a pension asset. Because the investment in the ERS system are more than the calculated liabilities for all of the employees. You turn to page 30, there's probably a table here. The one in the middle of the page shows that based on current assumptions, the ERS system has a debt of about $325,000. Police and fire system shows a little bit of a net liability of about $53,000. And then at the very bottom of that page, is another chart that shows the event percentages back to that. The ERS system was at 103.7%. So again, more invested than needed by a little bit, and PFRS was at 98.7%. Pages 34 through 36 of the down packet are budgetary everything schedules for the general water and sewer fund. There are a couple of areas in those budgets that are overspent because of some of the auto adjustments that are made where there wasn't budgetary money available. So there are overspent items in that. Those are the highlights. The last couple of pages, page 43 and 44. Because we moved on to the government office standards. We prepare a report on internal control and applying the laws and regulations. That report at the very end identified no significant deficiencies, no weaknesses in the control system, and no non-compliance with the law and regulations. All in all, a nice clean report. Continued improvement, continued growth in net assets, overall, I think we're pretty good here. With that, I will entertain the questions.
Any questions from the board for Dwayne?
Question, but it's going to take me about a year on the page. On 4F, there's a graph there that shows public safety generating 300 or so in revenue.
Yeah.
With public health being the opposite. And I'm curious if you could describe what public safety versus how you drew that line.
Public safety is fire. Public health is EMT and all that.
Very good.
Yeah.
It's a general question, Dwayne. So, you and I talk every spring about the old way of calculating unencumbered balance versus the new way. And if memory serves, the comptroller had I was always under the impression that the comptroller had a rule of thumb, 15 to 20% unencumbered balance. The old way of calculating things, if you get much above that, you probably have too much money on hand. Is there a rule of thumb now for the new GAAP basis accrual accounting as to an appropriate percentage to try to maintain?
It's still really the same percentage. Yeah, the calculation method is different, but it's really the same percentage of what they're looking for in determining whether somebody's not enough.
Okay. Good. Any other questions? Well, thank you much.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Okay.
Thanks.
See you.
See you.
Okay. Hey. Item number 4 on the agenda is our consent agenda. We have as soon as I get into the Dropbox.
I'm looking at the one that doesn't look like the same.
Looking on the which item?
The minutes from the January 9th. It doesn't look like the same.
Are those the highlighted one?
Yeah,
I've definitely seen the highlighted one.
yeah. I can see that. I can't do it like this. So,
Yeah, the one I'm looking at still has yellow highlights,
yeah.
so it shouldn't.
Mhm.
What are we missing?
We're using that audio, but it's fine enough. Unless someone wants to complain.
Oh, you don't think the live stream is picking up the mics?
No, I don't think it's gonna be that. But also, I think the speakers are, I think this is just as fine.
It's definitely coming through the speakers, which are right next to the owl. So it should.
Yeah, I think it's probably fine enough. We need to mix it.
So does that mean we're pulling the January 9th minutes?
I think that is best so that I can fix them and then I'll have them for the first staff, if that's okay.
Sure. Okay, so the consent agenda, we're removing the January 9 minutes. And we have an abstracts or multiple abstracts totaling $300,036.30 in general. Scroll too fast. EMS billing abstract totaling $16,808.28. A water fund abstract totaling $357,470.60. A sewer fund abstract totaling $166,471.88. And a trust and agency abstract totaling $66,530.89. And so I would entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda as amended.
So
Motion and a second. Any questions or discussion on the items in the consent agenda?
No, it seems like the abstracts are now actual PDFs with scans and things, so we're responsible for that. Thank you.
There's also some additional detail in the subject line of each, I noticed, which is also helpful. Any other comments or questions on the items in the consent agenda? Hearing none, then all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Item number 5 is our first public comment period. Privilege of the floor, and we have one member of the press online and one resident in person. Hi, Nadine, how are you?
Is it president?
It is.
We did check with you, I think because I thought that, a proclamation that I proposed would be on the agenda, but I didn't see it anywhere, so I just wanted to check whether it is on the agenda before I do the little brief.
So it is not, because we have two additional meetings this month, one this Thursday and one on the 22nd. Tonight's meeting has the potential to be extremely long. So since the proclamation has to do with the month of March, I figure I have a little bit of wiggle room.
Great, thank you. It is for the town board. Tomorrow. Post that it be at this time so that we can get publicity out for events.
Sure.
So, thank you for that clarification. And I appreciate your time. I wanted to, my name is Vivian Rose, and I'm one Avenue, and I am a former chief of visitor services and home organization that is its national park and historical in National University in Southern New York. And so consequently, women's history month is something that's important to me, and I don't like to see it go by. Acknowledgement. And it happens that this year's theme is really wonderful for this area, because this year's theme is celebrating women. Well, it changes every year, that theme. It's at a national level, and this is the only time that I've seen it be. So that's why I post a proclamation for you and for the town. And the terms of Ulysses introduced rich women who have kept and told the stories of very and I specifically am asking that you proclaim March as Lydia Godfrey Sears in the history month within your municipality. So I wanted to share 2 quotes, which I emailed to you, but I think public needs to hear. Lydia Godfrey Sears was historian for the village. She was school teacher in the local schools. She was the founder of our library, president, and chairman from 1934 to 1967. And she had a fingers in a lot, including she came before village government was entered in caucuses when there was one party proposing the slate of officers and was active in the elections. Now, how do I know that? Thanks to the brilliance of village records, there is her name and there are her signatures. And she was also a newspaper writer, so she wrote an article called Yesterday Today. It was published in the Free Press for almost a decade. He was also someone who was known to not she had a sharp tongue and a sharp view that was motivated by love for this community and for the children and people there. So as I was attempting to write a proclamation, I learned a whole heck of a lot more about Lydia Sears than I did when I started. And I learned that she is still 45 years after death. And she died 45 years ago yesterday. Very prevalent in this community. In 1977, she wrote to Carroll County, who was a newspaper writer, and is now a county historian. It really is difficult for me to be objective about my native village of Trumansburg, as ever since I first saw it. I remember seeing it. I have loved it. And love of learning is the theme of the Philadelphia Library. And love of life is what she had. And she used her life to make this area a better place for all of its citizens. From the littlest to the biggest. And Mark, I don't want to get you better on read your mom's contribution. I've heard that story many times. Thank you.
This little booklet called Remembering Lydia. Put together centennial of her death. So this is Marty's mother, Sylvia Potter.
During the time Lydia taught school at Willow Creek, which was 1941-42, I was a little girl of 4 years who lived next door to the one-room schoolhouse. She would see me outside playing. She often asked my parents if she could take me to school picnics and different functions. She would come for me and introduce me to the children. When it got time for me to start school in September, I expected to see tears. I walked in, and there was a strange lady by the name of Miss Evans sitting out. I looked at her and said, "You are not Mrs. Sears, and I am not going to stay." And I turned around and went back home. I remember Lydia, the lady before her time, with a great sense of humor. There are other reminiscences in here which demonstrate her love for the children of the city. And which I have to say, as I was reading, it really moved me, but even more so when I tried to find out who these people were and saw how deeply she had affected this community. I want to share that one of these other reminiscences is the daughter of Carolyn Lane, who was also a member of the Presbyterian Church. The children were hungry after services, so they would come in and take all the food off the table, making their parents angry with them, not something good on a Sunday. So he just decided there was a new children's table, and he just provided the cookies, and the children and the parents were happy. So he had a very practical response to a need, having sensible and taken care of it. The reason that this is a story that her own daughter, Carolyn Lane's daughter, when they moved here, was 7 years old. Lydia Sears became a good friend to our second grade daughter, who was devastated by the move and the loss of friends in various places. And our daughter was stubbornly as only a 7-year-old can, refusing to be comforted. Lydia did the sensible, talked to her about how sad she was, how hard it was. She listened to her, talking about her sadness. She treated her and her feelings as important. She was soon able to talk about her favorite books and a few interests in common with Lydia. Our second grader's first friend who helped her into a new community was Lydia Sears, and the reason that I feel a little weak is because learning about Lydia, it's been like finding a friend well in the into the. Anytime I talk to anybody about Lydia, they have something to share. And despite her reputation as a living nemesis, because everywhere she went, if there was something that wasn't good, she told you what she thought, and then she moved right on to the next thing. She loved everybody in this community. I have learned so much about this community, about the people who have settled this place and made it what it was, and who cared so deeply about its future, by talking to the people who are in these books, or their children, or their children's children, or by walking through the library and seeing that everywhere where there's a dedication to this new library, there was one in the old library who was on the fall, which was Lydia. The children's room dedicated to Lydia. The courtyard made by Lydia, called the Love of Learning Courtyard. She was everywhere, and she had fun. So today I found a photograph of the Campfire Girls, the first Campfire Girl group in the county. There's Lydia in her campfire outfit with other founding members of that group, and they're at Tottenham Point before the Boy Scout. There, you can't hardly trip over a picture, and she's doing that on as well. So I dearly hope that you will consider passing the proclamation, and I thank you for your time. And I just want to also finally thank you, Lorna, because when I was doing my research, finding all the places where Lydia Sears was appointed village, so I can say what the exact were. That's what historians do. Don't make it up. Look at what's actually in the document. You said, have you talked to Louise 80? And so I found Louise 80, and on the 11th of March, There's going to be an event at the Trustees Conservatory of Fine Arts in her words, which is a series of people. I will be talking about a friendship bracelet that one of those campfire girls owned, and all of the links in that friendship bracelet. One of them is Gladys Dorsey, the granddaughter of the Dorothy of Dorsey Hill. Louise will be presenting Lydia Sears, reading about why she loves her town. Darrell Cannon, our county historian, will be talking about a suffragist crime. And there are more. The Trustees Conservatory of Fine Arts putting that on. Louise was so excited about that in fact, just before I came here, I learned that on the 18th, she will be returning to the Presbyterian Church as Lydia Sears to talk about why she loves this town. And then the Presbyterian ladies, bless their hearts, are going to offer refreshments. And afterwards, we will have an opportunity to sit with Louise Avius, Lydia Sears, and hear from the people who are there what they love about Lydia and what they love about our town and village, about our village. So very exciting. Lots of great events happening. Could you get that date again? The 18th. There are two community roundtables. The 18th is the fellowship hall at 1 o'clock. That is Louise Avius, Lydia Sears, I love our towns. And the second one on the 29th of March is remembering our Lydians, stories of women who told us stories about and throughout the month of March, there will be an exhibit about Lydia Sears in the library. And there are more events and more events, but I just wanted you to get a snapshot. And when we did the presentation, then we will make a posting that says Lydia Godfrey Sears Month. And otherwise, we'll have all the events and people will know anyway. As Lydia Sears would have put it. Right? Anyway, thank you again.
Thanks, Vivian.
And I hope you don't stay too late about this. My computer is closed. Good night.
Thank
you.
Okay, we'll see no other members of the public. Unless David, if you have anything, let me know. Otherwise, seeing no other members of the public in person or online, we'll move along to reports from the board. Ann Corman will be joining us a little bit late. So when she gets here, we can go back to her report. But we'll move along to item number 7, which is reports from this board. A couple of items under mine. First, I would like to publicly acknowledge the passing of retired police chief Tom Ferretti. We all heard about it last week, but I would like to publicly acknowledge what I've said online and in various statements. Tom Ferretti served this village for 42 years as our first, and until the time of his retirement, our only police chief. And I just want to acknowledge the longevity of that service, the sheer number of years and mayors and board members and officers and residents that he interacted with over that time. The second item is I actually have I have it written out as a resolution, which I would like to move in honor of this being Tammy's last regular board meeting as our clerk. And so I want to just read this and then I will move it if someone would like to second it. Tammy's looking for that. Don't throw anything in. Whereas Miss Tammy Morris has served as the Trumansburg Village Clerk since 2005. And whereas in that time, Miss Morris has served under 3 mayors and has worked with over 36 village board, planning board, and ZBA members. And whereas Ms. Morse is a 2012 graduate of the Cornell Municipal Clerks Institute. And whereas Ms. Morse's knowledge and experience have earned her awards and citations from numerous municipal organizations, including the New York Conference of Mayors, the Office of the State Comptroller, and the New York State Association of City and Village Clerks, among others. And whereas Ms. Morse has served the residents of the village of Trumansburg with loyalty, caring, and dedication. Now therefore be it resolved that the Village of Trumansburg Board of Trustees hereby recognizes Ms. Morse for her efforts on behalf of the village, and be it resolved further that the individual members of the Board of Trustees each wishes to offer their sincere appreciation for Ms. Morse's nearly 2 decades of service to the village. And I would so move.
Second.
Any comments?
Thank you.
Also, sorry.
Then as we have a motion in a second, all in favor of adopting and presenting this resolution to Tammy, please say aye.
Aye.
You knew it was coming.
I know, and it's one of those.
Should have brought me that view.
Veggies is.
No, just don't mind me.
So as we know, Tammy will be leaving the village or leaving us officially at the end of the month. And so we don't have a meeting until the 13th, I believe, of March. So we are not permitted, by law, we are not permitted to be clerkless. And so I'm going to be appointing effective March 1. And this will be until our annual organizational meeting in April. So it's technically a 1-month vacancy. I am appointing Jessica Giles as village clerk. And to succeed Jessica's position, I am appointing Jen Schlossberg as both the part-time deputy clerk and part-time deputy treasurer. Both of those appointments will be effective March 1. And we have several other items under new business, which I will get to. But until we get to that point, I will turn it over to Marcia for fire and TACC.
Really boring. We had 25 calls. I don't know how separate those are. I didn't get that from the meeting that I was unable to attend, and they're still working on the build out of that fire truck. That will be slated for looking at in March.
That's not going to be delivered until
3 years from now, I think. Is that?
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and nothing for chamber.
No. I think they had a small coffee something in the morning, but I can't do mornings, so it makes it difficult for me.
Okay, moving right along then to EMS youth and street tree advisory.
For youth, we are continuing without a program manager. County, or rather, cooperative extension, sorry, has republished job posting. The way that posting is happening right now, the experience required versus the, compared to the wages. Don't think it's practical that they will fill the position. So we met as a commission earlier last week, excuse me, to talk about the possibility of standing up a stopgap position within the town because they're the fiduciary agent for the youth commission. So standing up a temporary position within the town to basically handle just the youth employment aspect of the program manager's usual job. So I'm sure I've talked about it, but we run basically first time job experience type of youth employment programs And that's one of the things that we really don't want to miss. It's like, it's a shame, and I've talked ad nauseum about this, so I won't talk about it tonight, but the value of the programs that we're missing is immense. It's very sad, and it stresses me out inordinately that we aren't able to fill this position, and that the reason we're not able to fill it is we can't adjust this contract. But fortunately, Caitlin Olson also recognized that and was sort of quick to raise this as a possible stopgap. So I think it looks like obviously the town hasn't moved on that, and it's their decision whether they implement that and how they do. But I've given her my full support. I think it almost goes without saying that that's definitely a good thing, and a really, I think, yeah, good thing behind Caitlin's parts.
Yeah, because I don't think otherwise you're gonna fill that position.
No, and I think even if we did, there's sort of a startup time to get a new employee going. So the chances that we'd be able to do it, even if we hired someone now, which again, I don't think we will.
Right.
So that's moving forward. That is sort of a piece of good news within that broader disappointment about not filling the position. Aside from that, recreation, those programs are going quite well. And moving on to EMS, I'll just quickly run through the calls. Covert 21, Hector 2, Interlaken 8, Lodi 1, Mecklenburg 13, Ovid 2, Romulus 1, Trumansburg 13, and Needless 27, which is a total of 88, which is a much more friendly total for the month than the last few. So that's a positive trend. And that, well, I guess the one last thing that I want to mention for EMS is Joel just shared today that we are approved to be an RSI agency, which would be the first one in the region. And essentially, RSI is a procedure that's used in the case of stroke victims or someone who might have, yes, in some acute diabetic situations, some overdoses. But basically, specially trained paramedics come and they put you in a drug-induced coma, and that way that they can transport you. Whereas now they would transport you, rush you to the hospital where you would be met by a helicopter to be transported to a regional crisis. Now they can just take it there, straight there, and they can administer these special, I don't know, procedure. I'm probably bumbling the whole explanation, but that's sort of the rough elements of it. And it raises interesting questions for us that I think we'll need to address at some point, largely around mutual aid and how we do that, because we will be the only regional provider for, we cover that 420 square miles or whatever it is, sort of our de facto coverage area. This will expand that if we let it, right? So we have to be careful about how we implement this. At this point, it's still in the early stages, but it is a really exciting development. It's something that Joel's been working on. There's a committee within the EMS department working on it. So it's definitely a moment of kudos, I think, for Joel and the department as a whole. But that's it.
Everything that they do that's wonderful and upskills.
Yeah.
Has this like hatchet hanging over it.
100%. 100%. I mean, it's the same thing. You move to a like paid 24-hour agency. Every little step you take, it's like the whole region just kind of pulls you.
Yeah, I don't think it can be overstated. And I'm not, certainly don't have the expertise to explain it any differently than Ben did, but the RSI program is a highly specialized, intensive program that requires a very highly specialized skill set. And there's a reason why. There's probably several reasons why, but there are at least two reasons why there are no other agencies in the region that do it. At least one is the skill set of the providers. And at least the other is they know that means they will be called on all the more potentially out of district and out of region when knowing that there's an RSI agency available will put potentially a call burden or a demand on the agency. So to your point, Ben, it's like the same things we're doing to make the same things that Joel is doing to make Trumansburg EMS a a critical agency in the region is also making Trumansburg EMS a critical agency in the region. It's kind of it speaks to all of the financial ramifications down the road in order to be able to maintain that.
You know, the other way to put it is, other agencies are seeing the incentive to stay away from being highly specialized because of all the issues that potentially come, which is detrimental to everybody's experience.
Yeah.
Fortunately, this is easier to limit than just being a paramedic, right? We don't have to have RSI, or we don't naturally have RSI capability at all times, right? You have to have specialized critical availability. So it's not built in, it's not automatic, that's what we stretch. But that possibility is there and is one that I think or Joel is being careful about how we navigate it. So we will see. But in any case, it is worth emphasizing that we have two critical care paramedics in Joel and Snyder. Without them, we couldn't stand this up. We also have Joel, who is a certified instructor of instructors, whatever the name of the certification is. So that allows him to then, pass that along without us having to go on tour or wherever else to get the training. So yeah, but I'll leave it there.
Okay, DPW water sewer CBZR farmers market.
So CBZR has moved on to short-term rental regulation. We kicked that conversation off last month, and we can see that this month, starting with kind of big picture, what are the opportunities for potential downsides of short-term rentals, what kind of issues we want to address and keep in mind as we talk about regulation. We'll see how that goes. I think there may be an opportunity to find an existing law that largely maps to what the community is thinking about as far as kind of broad strokes and regulation. If we can find that, and we can get guys not hate of, I don't really know if they're looking at Google of anything. We might be able to move more quickly. So we'll see how it goes. On the farmers market, the big news there is the winter market, Tuesdays 4 to 7 until April 11th up at the fire hall. That's kicked off. The schedule snafu was a little short this past week, but we'll keep it all the way until 7 going forward. So I haven't been able to make it up there, but that's a wonderful addition, and I'm really excited to see the market board thinking of new ways to get people involved. On the DPW water sewer side, so we had talked about potential water conservation pricing or something of that sort here last month. I looked more deeply at it and trying to kind of answer some of the questions that come up and realize that I think there is still a value there, but I think the value is actually diminishing compared to some other options we have, and it's more confusing and complicated than it needs to be, and I think it's not worth kind of really investigating further at this point. But as part of that, I did start looking more into water rates and what will likely be aiming for later in the year as far as an increase there. And I think by and large, we could be in a place to see the base rate stay relatively flat. And then see more of that value or that cost put on the per gallon rate. And I think that actually maps more closely to our actual operational costs. It also has the benefit of if you use more, you pay more. And I think that kind of is a useful incentive for people to, in and of itself, without needing to go the whole conservation approach. I think it can be more kind of self-regulating that way. But I'm still working on kind of final numbers on that. We'll keep working on getting those details done. At the same time, there is a sewer rate study that Municipal Solutions is looking into. I don't have a date. I want to get back to us on that. But that will be the other piece of the puzzle, is to see if there's anything that we can do adjust on that front. But as we did kind of mention, I think that was part of what I was hearing towards the end of Dwayne's presentation was there are some places in the water where we are over expended, and we need to start rectifying that pretty rapidly. That's pretty much it. I guess one last point just to say out loud, we are looking at, we have so the water meters that are in everyone's house have a radio read head on them, so the DPW can get a reading from on the street. Those are starting to get to the end of their usable life cycles, and more of a notice to the community, anyone paying attention, that we're looking at what the next generation of that will be, and that will eventually, at some point down the road, mean the people, the DPW have to get in and replace those in folks' homes. That is a whole thing, and we'll be working towards it. But the idea is that once we get there, our hope is to move towards continuous read meters, which means that every hour or 4 hours or 8 hours, they all kind of vary. The data will get up sent to a central location like a DPW remote situation where like they can send updates and alerts to people to say, hey, this looks like your meter's pretty high this month, or sorry, even this day. Maybe you got a stuck toilet or something to take a look at it. At the very least, sort of give us much more granular data to say like, hey, your water bill was high this month. Well, it looks like on these 3 days, your water was high. We're doing something interesting on those 3 days. And that's much more helpful than sometime in the last month, it takes a lot, right? So I think it's going to be very helpful for some of the billing and meter the issues that we run into. So kind of a foreshadowing future events.
When those meters come in, is there any consideration still to start metering our municipal buildings?
You did mention that. I'm going to bring that back up with them.
I feel like that if we are going to put the onus on our residents, to charge them for water, we should be responsible for looking at our situation. Pay for it or not, I think that's one.
I completely agree. Let me put that back on the radar. I remember when we talked about it, it didn't seem particularly troubling for the, something like this building. Obviously, the fire department has a much larger pipe going towards it. It's a much more expensive meter. So we might not be able to handle that one. But of the other one, like the DPW pump house here, we should be able to look into those things. So
We isolate the cost of that, what the cost will be to install. As you're assessing. Our spend would be, you can see what we're seeing.
I can get rough numbers.
I mean, when it comes
I think Dusty had rough numbers. I'm happy to bring it back to the board and have a conversation.
I don't know, I don't recall when it changed, but all of our buildings were metered. I believe they may still be metered, they're just not being read. And that goes back to 2005, when we did read meters. And then I think when we put the tank online on Halsey Street, in which the radio reads, for whatever reason, or then chose not to continue reading them, but at one point, all of the facilities had water meters.
Okay.
So Taylor, let's you and I see about see what they. That was nice.
Yeah, was it at radio rates? That's.
No, it's locate that the meters are in.
Yeah, right. If we still have the meters, but we can add radio as to the more. Maybe they'll actually upgrade that. I don't know what this is.
Yeah, I don't know, but when we put the snow tablets in it. Which.
Dusty wouldn't have been here when they were being read.
Oh, I know, that's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one. I was here. That's.
Dana might remember
It was
what
second
the
versus-
history of that was.
That is it for me on my board report.
Okay. Police and village ETC. Keith.
So, yeah.
Did a big update at. Did a big update at the city and village, so not a big update tonight. You mean monthly report for January, we did 161 calls per service. Criminal investigation included burglaries, a trespass, 3 domestic investigations, 4 accidents. Motor vehicle crash. In terms of other department happenings, we do have another crossing guard that declared. Right, so that would, this person would be in south. Through some time ago, I'm not sure how long, but there's a lot of it. We do that later. And in terms of ETC, we had a meeting last Friday. when we do come up during that meeting, we can talk about potential streets alignment and or you might walk Tompkins to get back to us. I had hope that maybe 5 days to be back, or perhaps the very end of August. The preference for early June because you have a lot of people that's go away at the end of the summer. Year starts, so we'll do more information on that. Weeks, potential community event. We did also talk about brought to the committee discussion around naming the street bridge, the bridge, in honor of the angle, and there was some, I think you were that you would sign off, but a little bit of trepidation around doing something that big in that location. The idea of it kind of being trying to make a historic statement of women's contributions to the village. Quickly, they appreciated that. And then Pete Darko joined us about birthday festivities. Saturday, second, giving village flag leading up with some additional programming. Well, that should be a fun event. That's good.
Any questions for Keith?
I have comments about the bridge, but we can talk about.
Ann Corman from the county legislature has joined us, so we're going to take a pause in our reports and move backwards to item number 6, reports from representatives. If you are so obliged, Ann.
Hey, thanks for letting me jump in. Sorry I was late tonight. So not a ton of updates, but just a few here. We had our committee assignments since last I saw you at the county for the legislators. And so I'll just tell you real quick what I got assigned. Was the chair again of our Planning, Energy and Environmental Quality Committee and our Community Housing Development Fund, which gives local grants to affordable housing projects. And I'm also a member of a couple other things, Workforce Diversity and Inclusion Committee, Housing Economic Development Committee, Public Safety Committee. That's new for me this year. And also I'm back on the IDA, the Industrial Development Agency. And one of the things we did recently, well, this was the other night, we passed a resolution to adopt a local law authorizing a 10% tax reduction for volunteer firefighters and ambulance workers. I don't know if you guys are looking at doing something locally, but I could talk to you more about that as far as what that means. Unless you're, again, or maybe you're already up to date on that. And some of the other, at least checking my notes here. Here it is. We have a property downtown. We refer to it often as the Red House. It's on 408 North Tioga Street. And we're looking at that through our facilities committee, what to do about that house. So it's been talked about whether to deconstruct it, whether to sell it, whether just to leave it in place. And so we've been getting tons of emails from all over the county and people wanting us to not deconstruct it, not take it down. So we are, but we're in the process of looking at that, but that has been in the news. And we are also looking at the possibility of renovating our county jail. And we've also gotten a lot of feedback from the community on that, which is good. Always to get feedback, I think. And so what we decided at our last legislature meeting was to have, I think we're going to call it like a task force, and it's going to include a lot of community members to work on that, to figure out, what to do. Is it meeting our current needs, especially with programming for people who are in jail? We would really like to have a lot more programming so people aren't just sitting there, so that they're, it's helping them deal with whatever issues they have. And certainly, the transition from being in jail to getting out, especially if you've been there for any length of time. People have lost their job and housing if they've been there more than a couple of weeks often. And I think those are the big things that I have.
Thanks, Ann. Any questions for Ann? We are familiar with the firefighter exemption. We are holding a public hearing for our version of the local law on Thursday.
Okay. And did you get my message in support of the proclamation for
Yes.
Women's History Month? Okay.
We don't have it on tonight's agenda because our agenda is fairly lengthy, but we will be taking a look at that also on Thursday.
Okay, great. And we're looking at doing something next month. We haven't announced who it's for, but we're looking at honoring a local woman who's done a lot for our community.
Great. Well, thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
Back to our reports. We'll go next to the treasurer's office.
Okay, so we just heard from Wayne, which means that the audit is on, which is fantastic, so we can go through that. The January bank statements have arrived, so we'll be updating things we can look back at January, now that we're in February, and close that statement out and get you the treasury report. Also, there's an updated budget in the Dropbox for you to review. Gentle reminder that the end budget sessions scheduled for the 16th and the 22nd. That's it. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Board members, do you want, as we have in the past, physical budgets, large sheet prints? Or no?
No.
Got one no.
Yes.
Got one
Yes.
no. Keith?
Thank you.
No. Okay. So we will do.
Okay, very good. Gonna have some extra?
I actually have a couple extra in the off chance that anyone shows up.
Okay.
Happened twice in 9 years.
Okay.
Okay, clerk's office.
Charts from, materials, and, we estimated really low and had no idea what the police department had. So we went from the estimate of 40 to 50 boxes, it ended up destroying 90 boxes worth of outdated material. So all of the stuff that needed to be destroyed up to date was done until I opened some. So right now we're in space upstairs. Looks like who done it. I am going to work on the next few days to get that cleaned back up. If nothing else, if I don't get the boxes completely done, I will be just gonna jump her with a compatible list and how to put them into my inventory that I've been trying to since we did our last grant for the retention. So I made some pretty good progress in that. To make things more complicated, about a year ago, New York State kind of changed the retention laws. So a lot of our current stuff, so I have stuff that we still have to hold on to according to the old regs, and then we have new stuff that has to go into the dates of the retention for the new regs, so that's maybe it's just a bit of I will get it. So that's kind of what I'm doing, I'm kind of the password list, working on things that need to be passed on, including the annual sexual harassment training, anti-sexual harassment training, and violence in workplace training. DVDs came yesterday or Friday, I guess. Handed them off to Jessica with, this is how I used to do things, do it your own way, or whatever works, but it is required. It's not only required of the staff of village officials and employees, but it is also required of the ILU. So I can get you links to some online materials. You can try to find a CD drive in your homes to put the CD in and watch the really antiquated, terrible movies. But Jess is going to be asking for signature, signing off, saying that you have watched the training and that you're abiding by our personal policies statement. So beyond that, I've just cried a lot, and I'm going to continue to cry until you know, they dry up, and we all know that is bad. So thank you for your kind words. Thank you for 16 great years, my repeat. And it's until legally here. But I'm going. And I think that's it.
Okay.
Movie, the farmer's market.
Farmers Market movie night.
Yeah.
And I did that with the first Young Hearts. I can't remember what we watched, but Wyatt and I went to the first ones. Definitely not the sexual harassment. These are those.
Maybe you should,
Probably a good time to start.
seeing as how I have to take that training like 4 times a year, I figure
Well, that was.
why not take it a 5th?
That was gonna be my question. Is there any way of like, yes,
No reciprocity.
No.
Yep, although I appreciate that we've all been watching the same video for literally years, they're still on CD, does that tell you how old they are?
I don't have one of those. That's.
Who does?
Wait, I just said I separate.
Or is it a
My
DVD?
man has a DVD.
No. That's, it is literally.
Links would be best. Links would be best.
Now, yeah, for supervisors, I think that's a great idea. It may actually help with EMS because they're not always available to come in. Although when we beckon them in like that, it is mandatory 2-hour pay. So that can be enticing to some. Yeah. And the reality is a lot of them do get it at their full-time jobs. So I would leave that up to the board, but it doesn't speak to our personnel policy. That's why I hesitate.
Okay. I had a schedule. See if we can stay there. Old business. We have a continued conversation about our naming and dedication process for footbridges, buildings, tree stumps.
And we'll take a trees.
It's a stump speech.
Yeah.
Sounds
Great.
Does that mean we need it? Harder taking it? Yes.
I'll just hand it.
Marsh, did you have some things you
So
wanted?
the feedback you got from ETC. What they say.
Again, that's not necessarily representative of the entire committee.
No.
That's just a comment and discussion.
Yeah. it was-
I mean, because I did see a comment saying that. Somebody thought the bridge was unattractive and put together and worthy. And I just think as a lifelong village resident, I completely disagree. That little tiny bridge is so, if it wasn't such an asset and a value to the community, we wouldn't have been bumped endlessly to fix that bridge. And all you have to do is ask my husband how many days, every time he was asked at the post office when that bridge was gonna be fixed. And it is an asset to our community, and not only that, it brings people into the village center. That is the only safe avenue, at least when I was a little girl growing up. Grandmother used that bridge and my mother pushed me across that bridge, and I pushed my grandchildren across that bridge. But it was the only safe avenue to get from that end of town without going through the main thoroughfares that you could get safely into the village center. So I think that's why there was such an outcry when the bridge was out of service, is that that was the safest way that families and elderly people and moms with carriages could get into town safely without having to go on the, you know, on the busy roads. And I just think there's no doubt in my mind that I think the recognition of women is way more significant for recognition than that. But I will say that this little bridge is something, even though it's seemingly small, it's very much like the small little ideas that all the women had in this village that turned into something to be very substantial, that contributed to very significantly to our community. So I think, like you said, I don't think we can have 100 people gather at that bridge, but maybe just a small. I mean, I was very happy when Alan thought about naming the bridge to begin with, or dedicating the bridge in somebody's name, and then I thought of all the women. How many had contributed in Shermansburg, and thought, you know, that's some place to start, because we really don't have anything yet.
Yeah.
Nothing. Zero football. So really, it was a gesture. A symbolic gesture to start something off. And as Jessica mentioned, there's more than one bridge in this town, there certainly is, but I don't know. As somebody that's lived here for a really long time, that teeny little bridge has brought me to town so many times. As a little girl, my dad used to own a dry cleaner where the post office is now. And so we used to walk there and take that bridge to my dad's office, and Mr. Cornell's longer. Charity cross. You know, it really brought people from the outskirts, like from Pennsylvania, well, that's. Yeah, so it wasn't too bad, like, senior was there. So, because I can't remember. Something.
Maybe it's interesting feedback, and I'm sorry, I missed that part of the discussion, because certainly if the bridge was uniformly stained one color, that would be nice, but it is an opportunity to let's maybe develop maybe in conjunction with these, what would be fitting of those elevators based on this bridge.
Or maybe just make that a little marker in conjunction with other things. I mean, it's no doubt in my mind that more significant recognition needs to be made to the women that have contributed to this town. But when Alan mentioned that, I thought, you know, that's a start. At least it's a gesture to, you know.
And it's the only village, literally, the rest are all owned
Right.
by the state of town, so it's the only.
I mean, maybe there's something we could do to make it a little bit more attractive, but I don't know. I like it. I love it. I just do. And my granddaughters just love going over that bridge. They were, even though they were 3 and when it was out of service, they were like, oh, the bridge is broken. We can't go there. So
I'm glad you reminded us of how many people inquired and watched the bridge project.
yeah, and I mean, Had the village not seen significant value in it, we certainly wouldn't have gone to the expense to fix it. Cause it could have just gone by the wayside, but people constantly asked about it. So.
It's so important. It should be good for management.
Mhm. Yeah, and like I said, it's a really safe thoroughfare to get people from the outskirts down into the village center, because as a kid, when we were walking to school, for those of you that don't know, I lived on Halsey Street, still live on Halsey Street. My parents lived on Halsey Street my dad lived there for 83 years and never moved off it. So we were not allowed to go around the Elm Street bend.
Yeah, it's definitely.
Because my mother thought it was way too dangerous. We were never allowed to walk there. So if we were going into town, we had to go down the short end of Pennsylvania Avenue and take the bridge. And if we were going to school, we had to go down the short end of Pennsylvania Avenue, up P Street, to the sidewalk, down Elm, and then across the street to go to school. So I think maybe I'm just sentimental when it comes to that little bridge.
So the two of you want to keep working along with ETC
Sure.
on that bridge naming as well as any other large,
Or some other
larger,
maybe some of them.
larger acknowledgements. I'm particularly thinking in conjunction with March.
Yeah, yes, and I really do appreciate Vivian's involvement, and she's a historian, and I'm sure she could work with the Historical Society. So that we can get something really significant done eventually. Okay.
I would just assume task the two of you with working on that.
Okay.
Did that side packet though from, sorry, from the process or not?
I think I just delivered the process.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know if you're, how,
Well, I mean, one of those emails we received, I wanted to try to create, and if certainly board members have an opinion on this, kind of a more robust, formalized process for how we decide and things get named. My only hesitation is that we could create the best process we want, and then the very next board could say, we don't like this process, and toss right out the window. So,
I think
you know, the process for naming things is actually statutory. It's written in state law how things get named. It's written in state law how boards make decisions. So I don't know that we need to try to reinvent that wheel only to have it thrown out by a future board. But if we wanted to develop a process for ourselves, then I don't have a.
Can they come by way of a resolution? Like if the Historical Society got together and formed a committee and brought it forward to the board, is that something that can be done that way for consideration?
Anybody, this board can consider anything that someone brings to us. But I think one of the emails we received was more conceptually about, you know, should we try to create a process that the village will quote adhere to? The problem with that always becomes a constitutional one. We cannot bind a future board, which usually ends up being the reason why things don't get done. And again, I don't mind philosophically, I don't have a problem with us creating a process that we like, as long as we acknowledge that it is not in any way set in any kind of stone for anyone ever.
My inclination is that ad hoc, sort of moving along like this, tends to demonstrate some sort of organic push or something. And in the case of naming, we're talking about generally exceptional people or generally exceptional things or generally exceptional events, where we don't really need a process. To me, I think that organic upswelling of support and, you know, public voice in one form or another should be exceptional, and it should, I think that's perfect. I think having a process and sort of channeling people here would be almost like a red herring. Like people would, you know, it's like, this is where your good idea goes to die kind of a thing. Like if you don't follow, if you don't jump through the hoops, if you don't do whatever, like right now we can say, this is a great idea, like we can move forward with it. If the Historical Society wants to submit something and suggest something, they can absolutely do that. They will absolutely hear it. Right? If the EDC wants to work on it, they can absolutely do that. They will absolutely hear it. If like, you know, any individual one of us or an individual community member, you know, I think to me that's the process as it should be for something like this, which is to say no process.
I think we certainly have committees that are already assembled to be basically a sounding board for anyone that wants to bring something forward. I mean, it's a fundraiser there, or that's what if I secured a gift that I wanted the name attachment to it, and I just basically wrote a proposal that was actually committee that reviewed my proposal and said either yes, this is worthy of this naming, or here's why it's not, or something like that. So I mean, I think that's not really, you could have a much more smaller scale, something of that with the UPC or even the chamber, I don't know, something like that, where it's, at least it's, if you want to bring forward a nomination for a meeting, here's the group that you deliver your nomination.
And then they bring it to the board, yeah, I think that.
That committee wants to make a recommendation to us. Certainly we have the representation of the board on those committees. Which might be a little less intimidating than coming straight to the board saying, do this. But that could be informal,
Or it could be both, right? Someone who are comfortable going to ETC or one of us.
Sure.
And I think all avenues are appropriate for something
I
like
do think with naming things, right, if you say yes, you have to be ready for it to be forever. I mean, I suppose another board or somebody who just said, I don't like that anymore, take that plaque down. But then that's just like the perfect social media firestorm. So it's nice, I think, to have at least some thoughtful discussion over just, is it appropriate? Like, are we willing to stand by this for the test of time that we put this person's name on this part of our town? It's worthy of thought versus just, too informal where somebody comes up and says, okay, yeah, you want to name that?
Just like Vivian did.
Yeah.
Do the research, give the reasons why they had acknowledged where this is important and critical to them as happen. That's.
I actually think the ETC is the perfect avenue. Well, the kind of falls under the umbrella of et cetera. That is a good place for that initial discussion and consideration to be done.
And especially, we live in a time where names are starting to come down on things, right? Because for historical reasons, we can debate that all we want, whether that's appropriate or not, but it does help to do a little bit of fact checking on when someone brings a name forward to make sure
Yeah, we should do the research.
that is, there's not something there that we then get embarrassed by that. Well, it turns out that person was, had 9 warrants out of them. Something like that. That was not in the proposal. That we did find and doing a little bit of the history. So things like that can happen.
Okay, well, for now, we will leave it to the two of you with ETC to discuss Women's History Month and the bridge, not necessarily exactly connected, but in all of that context. Okay, next item of old business is discussion of our draft zoning revision. We have a couple of environmental assessment forms to look at, or 2 sections of it anyway, and then a resolution to declare our intent to be lead agency. Ben, do you want to take us through this?
So this is the earliest start of the environmental review process. I won't go into all the details of how that whole process works. We'll kind of go through it, but the first step is to declare our intent to be the agency that will run the actual environmental review process. To do that, we need to look at part 1 and 2 forms of this environmental assessment form. Part 1 basically states what this project is, and I'm happy to kind of walk through, maybe I can read the description, to see that that hopefully is accurate, and then we can walk through just the first page and a half or 2 pages or so, which are really the important parts for this particular piece. The rest aren't really applicable because we're not talking about an actual development project, we're talking about a zoning change. And then from there, we can kind of jump to the next part unless there's any questions. So I'm just going to take a moment to read through the description of the actions. So the village of Trumansburg is revising its zoning ordinance to align with their recent updated comprehensive plan in accordance with efforts to adapt to changing community needs. In addition to clarifying confusing or contradictory language, the zoning regulations and updates will encourage affordable housing with goals to facilitate a more inclusive community, attracting families and meeting demands for senior housing. Growth in population and housing stock will help support local businesses and institutions through increased customers, school population, and tax base. Affordable housing will be encouraged by allowing the addition of accessory dwelling units and reducing the requirement for small housing. The updated zoning ordinance will include provisions to revitalize existing housing types in the village that are currently illegal due to lot setback, lot size, and width regulations. These updates reflect the village's interest to discourage large multi-unit housing and infill development that are contradictory to the traditional character of the village while increasing the availability of affordable housing. There's some information about who's involved in all that, and then on the next page, we talk through government approvals. So these are the groups that we will be reaching out to see if they have any interest in either leading or having any other interest in the review of the zoning. Also, specific areas that have mandatory review, like the county planning board has a required review for any of this zoning adoption might take on. So the groups that are included here are the village trustees ourselves, the village planning board, surrounding area counties, Tompkins, Seneca, and Schuyler, as well as the towns of Ulysses and after Colbert, as well as the Tompkins County Planning Board, the Regional Planning and Development Board, and New York State Department of Ag and Markets, as well as the DEC. We're not in the coastal areas, so we say no to all those. And then the next section is planning and zoning. As the following questions I'll read about, we'll talk about them if we feel like it. Will administrative or legislative adoption or amendment of a plan, local law, ordinance, rule, or regulation be only approvals which must be granted to enable the proposed action to proceed? Yes, then it is a law. That's all it is. If yes, then we have to complete the following option, the following section. So, do any municipally adopted comprehensive land use plans include the site where the proposed action is to be located? Yes. Our comp plan does cover this. If yes, does the comprehensive plan include specific recommendations for the site where the proposed action will be located? Yes, it does have goals and action items proposed for zoning. Is the site for the proposed set action within any local or regional special planning districts designated for state or federal heritage area, watershed management plan, or other? So yes, it's identified in the Frontenac Creek Glen unique natural area, which is a Tompkins County designation, and the Cuba Lake Watershed Management Plan, which is a secondary regional planning and development board designation. Is the proposed action located wholly or partially within an area listed in an adopted municipal open space plan or an adopted municipal farmland protection plan? That's a no, we don't have either of those. And then the next section is zoning and then existing community services. So on zoning, is the site for the proposed action located in municipality with adopted zoning law or ordinance? Yes. If yes, was the zoning classification included in any applicable overlay district? So there's an attached map, which we should make sure we actually send along. I'm not sure it's actually in this PDF itself. I don't see that. So we'll make a note to add that too. Is the use permitted or allowed by a special and conditional use permit? Yes. Is a zoning change requested as part of the proposed action? Yes. What is the proposed new zoning? The site sort of changes to basically all of the articles. And then we'll attach the actual new proposed zoning. And then the final section, in what school district is the proposed site located? In the central Trumansburg school district. Will police or other public protection forces serve the site? So our police department, Tompkins County Sheriff, and State Police. Which fire protection emergency medical services serve the project sites at fire department are an hour EMS. What parks serve the project site? Again, State Falls, Shrewsbury Fairgrounds, Village Farmers Market. Not sure I count all those in parks, but could be more verbose if needed. That's all that applies to this. As I said, the rest is all for specific project development, which this is not. So that is the overview of the kind of project and setting of this action. Are there any questions on that?
Very straightforward.
Is everyone lulled to sleep? Yeah.
I do have a question.
Oh, sure.
Sorry, the government rules.
Yes.
I noticed that the BZA was like off that and intentional or was it just a scale? Is it so I'll change?
Yeah,
believe that's intentional.
I think so too. I mean, the guy has reviewed this and EDR put it together. I believe it's intentional, though I couldn't say as to why.
I believe the BZA is a judicial review body,
Right.
so they wouldn't have comment on a document that they are charged to adjudicate after the fact
Yeah.
versus the planning board, which is advisory.
There's no other questions on that, then we go to part two. And so this is saying, you know, are there, I'm trying to think of the best way to do it. Basically, this is saying, what are any potential impacts of the project? And the short of it is no, like there are none. And I'm happy to either read through all of these individually, which we can do. There are further comments below each reason for no. And I could also go through that if people would love to hear me lather on. Maybe I'll ask for any opinion of the board. How far down I'd like to go on reviewing those individually.
Individually, no. The numbered categories, which are all checked no, I think we should read into the record.
Okay.
Yeah, that was gonna be one.
Yeah. All right. Buckle up. Impact on land. So proposed action may involve construction on or physical application of the land surface of the proposed site. The answer is no. Reasoning being future development may occur irrespective of proposed changes to the zoning ordinance. However, for the purposes of this EAF review, it is too speculative to consider potentially individually or cumulatively. Furthermore, each such matter should be subject to secret review at the time of the project implementation.
If you want to skip the reasoning behind the no, I
Okay.
think that's fine, but we should read
Fair enough.
into the record that we are actually saying no to these items.
Got it. We'll carry forward. Impact on geological features. The proposed action may result in the modification or destruction of or inhibit access to a unique, unusual landforms on the site. No. Impacts on surface water. The proposed action may affect one or more wetlands or other surface water bodies. No. Impacts on groundwater. The proposed action may result in new or additional use of groundwater or may have the potential to introduce contaminants to groundwater or aquifer. No. Impact on flooding. The proposed action may result in development on land subject to flooding. No. Impacts on air. The proposed action may include a state regulated air emissions source. No. Impact on plants and animals. The proposed action may result in a loss of flora or fauna. No. Impact on agricultural resources. The proposed action may impact agricultural resources. No. Impact on aesthetic resources. The land use of the proposed action may be obviously different from or are in sharp contrast to current land use patterns between the proposed project and a scenic or aesthetic resource. No. Impact on historic and archaeological resources. The proposed action may occur in or adjacent to a historical or archaeological resource. No. Impact on open space and recreation. The proposed action may result in the loss of recreational opportunities or reduction of an open space resource as designated in any adopted municipal open space plan. No. Impact on critical environmental areas. The proposed action may be located within or adjacent to a critical environmental area. No. Impact on transportation. The proposed action may result in change to existing transportation systems. No. Impact on energy, the proposed action may cause an increase in the use of any form of energy, no. Impact on noise, odor, and light, the proposed action may result in an increase in noise, odor, or lighting, no. Impact on human health, the proposed action may have an impact on human health from exposure to new or existing sources of contaminants, no. Consistency with community plans, the proposed action is not consistent with adopted land use plans, no. Consistent with community character, the proposed action project is inconsistent with the existing community character, no.
And I would just editorialize that as we have mentioned in prior seeker processes, New York state law is very specific that this seeker review is specifically about the adoption of the law, not any future potential impacts of the law. So anytime you hear something where the answer is no, and you think, well, couldn't zoning affect X, Y, or Z? Well, yes, zoning could affect X, Y, or Z, but this board's adoption of the zoning doesn't affect X, Y, or Z. So we don't play degrees of separation when we're doing environmental review.
Yeah, I think that initial kind of justification broadly applies to almost all of it. That while future development may occur, we would be speculating to understand what it would be or might not be, and that seeker would be required for those actions either.
Questions or comments from this board? This lovely document provided to us by New York State.
Some of the states like it. But,
Indeed, indeed. Okay.
So if there are no other comments, then we do have a resolution to actually move this forward. And we're going to have this.
And this is the corrected version.
Oh, okay, the one in
Yeah.
So let's read through it. We find it isn't, we'll make a change. So I would move the following resolution. Village Board of Trustees intent to declare a lead agency for the adoption of the Village of Trumansburg zoning revisions. Whereas the Village of Trumansburg Board of Trustees is adopting an update of the zoning ordinance to align with the 2021 comprehensive plan, which reflects conditions that have changed since the previous plan was adopted in 2008. And whereas under the supervision of the mayor, the Board of Trustees appointed a comprehensive plan and zoning revision committee to guide the process. And whereas with the assistance of planning consultant EDR, the CPDR has developed revisions to the Village of Trumansburg zoning ordinance and environmental documentation in support of the same. And whereas the zoning revisions includes the clarification of confusing or contradictory language in the zoning regulations, as well as updates to encourage affordable housing with goals to facilitate a more inclusive community, attract young families, and meet the demands of senior housing. Whereas these changes are needed to provide residents and local decision makers with the predictability they need to make informed decisions about the village's land use and future development. And whereas the secret proposed action is legislative in nature involving the adoption of the zoning revisions by the Board of Trustees. And whereas pursuant to SECRA, the CPDR submitted to the Village Board Part 1 of the full environmental assessment form dated January 8th, 2023. And whereas the Village Board determined that the project was classified as a type 1 action of the SECRA and was implementing regulations pursuant to 6 NYCRR 617.4. And whereas in accordance with the provisions of NY6 NYCRR Part 617, the Board of Trustees of the Village of Trumansburg intends to serve as lead agency for the secret review of this type 1 action, and in this capacity will determine if the proposed action will have a significant effect on the environment, and now therefore be resolved by members of the Village of Trumansburg Board of Trustees as follows. The Village Board will forward a copy of Part 1 of the FEAF, full environmental assessment form, to the involved interested agencies, along with a request for comments relative to the project based upon the finding and determination of this project is a type 1 action. The coordinated review is required, and 3, this resolution shall take effect immediately.
And you are moving that?
I am, but with one adjustment as I was reading the CPZR. We submit this to this board, so adjust that. Thirdly, and whereas submitted. Review. So I'd say whereas pursuant to the State Environmental Quality Review Act, the village board reviewed part one of the form by the assessment form dated so and so.
Okay.
And completed.
Sure.
So you're changing the original thing.
I am the one that's in the, save it, it will be in the Dropbox, yeah.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion?
Usually I thank you for all the work that goes into this time. Thank you for the just really nice.
Thankfully, I've gotten a little smarter now and have an EPR and a guy doing most of the writing, which is a much better approach. Especially when I have them communicate together and I just stay on it.
If there's no additional comment or discussion, then all in favor of adopting this resolution with our intent to declaring our intent to be lead agency for the adoption of the Village of Truman Green zoning revisions, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Good.
I'll also add
And so we will get this part one with associated notifications sent to all of our municipal entities.
Actually, one. So I don't know the secret, but on the draft itself, I had sent out a message for folks to take a look at the draft. There is a small change I proposed to the front setbacks. By and large, the change is just to make it more clear what the intent is. It's a little unclear after reading it and getting some feedback. So I did have a change in the draft that I sent out. It's also in the Dropbox. But I guess the ask is to see if there's any concerns with that change. I'm also happy to kind of read through the change and talk a little more about it if that's necessary. The wording is just a wording change to reflect the intent of what the CPZR committee did in that sentence, but it was a little bit unclear which effects apply to where versus newly proposed building versus existing buildings. So just kind of clarifying that. And then there is one small change I'd like to propose, which is making it, I'm being very high level, I'll maybe be more specific in a second. Moving from 10% setback, average setback from the houses around it. Let me start over. There is a front yard setback requirement. The current framing in the current wording in the document makes it a little unclear. Does that front yard setback apply to existing buildings or only new buildings? The intent was only new buildings, that for new buildings, they should be within 10% of the average setback of the surrounding houses. So basically they're kind of in line with surrounding houses. That's the intent, to keep that kind of character of that neighborhood. There is a change proposed in the document that is making that more clear that that's only for new houses. And existing houses, it doesn't apply to them. They wouldn't become non-conforming in some sort of way. That's the one change to kind of clarify that. There is another change that after hearing some feedback on that section and trying to look for other zoning laws in other municipalities that have something similar, the 10% number is a little bit small. It means it's not quite as varied as we do see around the village, and it's a little too constricted. So I'd like to see that be 1%. If people have a little more wiggle room in there. Did anything that I just said make any sense? And are people open to making those changes? Seeing that we should send a copy of this along with the secret stuff that we just put through.
I think you're changing your grade.
Great.
It's well done. It's To me, it's a clarification, but it's more in line with what it always been. So I think that.
Yeah. Unless there's any other comments, I'm going to accept those changes. And then I'll put an updated copy of this in the Dropbox with the map so that everything is in one place. All right.
Okay, any other items of old business? New business. First item of new business is we are now officially introducing this year's tax cap override local law, which is the same as the one we have adopted every year since New York State, in its infinite wisdom, sought to hamstring local municipalities' ability to offer services through a tax cap. That's my own editorialization. So we will need to set a public hearing date. I would recommend our regular March monthly meeting, March 13. Unless there's any glaring conflict with doing it then. Okay. Then we will need to notice the public hearing for local law 3 of 2023.
We can slow it down.
Public hearing will be March 13 of 2023. And we will publish the notice and the draft local law, which is here. Yes, yes, it is.
Yeah, and then there's a second one, sewer law. Yeah, that's what prompted me to ask him. This is magical naming process.
Okay, so that is the tax cap override introduction. Next item of new business is IT assessments. So I don't know how much everyone remembers because I don't think we've discussed this in much in depth. The individual who has managed our in-house IT for the last 20, Tammy, how long? A long time. For the last great number of years, will be retiring this summer. Coincidentally with that, the town of Ulysses, and it is in the Dropbox, hopefully everyone had a chance to look at it. The town of Ulysses had put together an RFP for IT services based on feedback they received from their audit by the state comptroller a year or two ago. My thought, the town of Ulysses received back several responses to their RFP. I don't know if they've decided for sure who they're going with, but I would like to utilize the information they received. I would like to utilize the information the town of Ulysses received in order to contract with wondering if I even put in everything I wanted to put in here. Why am I not seeing it? Yes, okay, there it is. No, there it isn't. Give me a second here. Actually, it doesn't matter. I would like to have the board's approval to reach out to one of these firms. I believe it's the one from Buffalo. One of the firms that responded to the town's RFP essentially broke down their response into a couple of different pieces. And the one that I'm interested in is having this firm come in and do a comprehensive assessment of our IT needs from the physical to the software side and say, this is where things stand and this is what our recommendation would be. That assessment will then allow us to determine what the best course of action is to move our IT needs into the 21st century.
Is it the advanced 2001?
Are they the one from Buffalo? That sounds right.
Page 4.
Yeah.
It's just the first one they got. The one of those.
And the Erie County.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that is them.
Okay.
That is them. Now, their response to Ulysses RFP was basically, we will do a full assessment, and this is how we will, this is what we will charge to be your IT administrator. I don't know if that's the direction we will end up wanting to go, but they have municipal pricing to do assessments. And the assessments they do will be very comprehensive, and then we can decide how to proceed from there. So this is more of a discussion than anything else. There's nothing to approve yet, but I would like to reach out to them, tell them that we would essentially like to piggyback on what they've already done for Ulysses and have them do the same for us if Ulysses has approved it. And if Ulysses doesn't approve it and goes with someone else, we'll say, well, we really like your proposal for Ulysses. Would you do an assessment for us?
I think it's great and terrifying.
Yes.
Any thoughts on that part?
I think that's great. I'd be curious to begrudgingly be maybe involved in it. I have opinions. I probably should keep them myself, but be interested to be slightly involved. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, everything you saw in the RFP, everything from password management to software to just everything included.
Yeah. Password management would be nice.
Yeah, and in particular, police department and EMS. Our IT total infrastructure is going to be a little bit larger than Ulysses because of those two departments in particular. But it'll be interesting to see what they come up with. Okay, then I will reach out. Okay.
Computer. I don't know.
Super dorky awesome.
Okay, then next item of new business is the next major step in moving towards the piece of land currently known as Camp Barton becoming a state park under municipal management. Through much back and forth between Ulysses' attorney and our attorney, we have developed a process whereby we would be forming with the town of Ulysses and the town of Covert, should those municipalities adopt something similar to this, what is known in not-for-profit corporation law as a local development corporation. Local development corporation is a unique type of not-for-profit reserved for municipalities. The most obvious version would be an industrial development association, an IDA, economic development association. I don't know if the Downtown Ithaca Alliance is exactly this type, but that type of organization, which can either be a subset of a municipality, can be sanctioned by a municipality, or can be made by municipal members. So what we have is two separate documents. I'm hoping everyone had a chance to review it, so I don't have to read it into the record. The first document is the certificate of incorporation of the organization itself, which we are calling the Three Falls Local Development Corporation. The certificate of incorporation, articles of incorporation are fairly boilerplate for the formation of corporations in New York State. The rubber meets the road in the bylaws, which I will go through a few items. The Three Falls Local Development Corporation will be the entity permitted to do independent things as corporations are allowed to. The principal office of the corporation will be across the street at Town Hall, 10 Elm Street. The members, we have two classes of members, voting members and non-voting members. Voting members can only be public corporations, so municipalities. Non-voting members could be any person or entity. The reason for the construction of the two classes is section 3.02. There will be fees, dues, and assessments required of voting members. Basically, the voting members will have to pony up some money in order to get this thing going. If for any reason a voting member chooses or cannot pay into this project, then the voting member would lose their ability to vote on matters before the corporation. Non-voting members would not need to pay anything. And then there are certain powers reserved only to voting members, including to amend or modify the certificate of incorporation, admit new voting members, so on and so forth. But the voting members need to themselves, each of them, each municipality would need to vote in favor of those types of changes, which include changes to the certificate of incorporation, admitting new voting members, incurring debt, making loans, changing the corporation's accountants or auditors, certain types of transactions, legal action, lawsuits, changing the corporation's name, and the like. Directors on the board of the corporation will be representatives of the voting members, so the municipalities. We will need to designate 2 members of this board to be a director on the board of directors of this corporation. The board of directors has the power of basically what you might think of as the day-to-day management of the corporation. The officers of the corporation are defined. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff about kind of the annual requirements of the corporation. So did everyone get a chance to look through the bylaws? Did anything jump out at anyone where you have questions or concerns?
I think the obvious concern is that eventuality or that possibility.
Well, we're going to find out tonight. Covert meets tonight, Ulysses meets tomorrow, so we'll know by Wednesday morning.
So I know there were some questions raised in the State of the Village. People kind of didn't understand the structure of it, like, you know, they understood the purpose certainly as to why we want to preserve that land for the greater good. But I think that they were confused as to what our financial commitment was regarding that.
So the structure is that this organization, assuming that the park, that state park, New York State Parks does become the owner of the property. This is the organization that will be contracting with parks to manage the property.
Okay, so does the state park handle the rehabilitation? Or does the
Necessarily.
management entity handle it?
Depends on what's being rehabilitated.
Okay, So if they all the cabins are dilapidated or dilapidated and the big building needs revamping and.
That will be subject to negotiation between this organization and parks.
And how is the? So if this organization and the park are working together, and obviously, like you mentioned, it's state of the village, there's gonna be a fee. For people to use it, just like you would pay a fee at the park. How is that divvied up? When
And is
there's-
subject to negotiation
That is
between this
good.
organization and state.
So this is a whole, this is just saying we're going in,
Theoretically, this development corporation could do a lot of other things. This is not specific to Camp Fire. This is not specific to anything with the parks. This is 3 municipalities forming an entity. We're forming a company.
okay,
Now, the reason why we're forming the company is so that we can contract with parks. But the law doesn't limit what this company can do as long as it's in something in the economic development realm, broadly speaking.
and this would allow this not-for-profit entity to say apply for grants.
Absolutely.
And seek out funds. to do
Absolutely.
certain things. Okay.
Absolutely. So the terms. Absolutely.
Oh, that's good.
The terms of the management of the park is separate from and after this. Because right now Parks doesn't have anyone to negotiate with.
Right. So what you're saying is by developing this entity, the 3 municipalities getting together, it just opens up other options for us to do maybe some creative out of the box thinking.
It's the necessary first stop for any of the options.
Right,
So it's not that it opens up extra options.
Right.
necessarily, Just that this is the fundamental first step.
right.
We've sort of put the wagon before the horse in some ways, right? We've been negotiating with parks, I think.
I guess that was my.
Well, Parks is operating in, frankly, in a lot of good faith by doing something in parallel to something else that they would normally wait for. In a normal world, Parks would not even be talking about purchasing the property until they had a management company to negotiate with first. Unless Parks was of the intention that they wanted to manage the property themselves, which they know they don't.
Mhm.
So they're moving forward with the acquisition simultaneous to us forming the corporation. So that we can begin discussion about how the corporation will manage the park once it's acquired. So there's actually 3 things happening in conjunction with each other that
So
would
this-
normally be stacked. You would normally have one, then the next, then the next. But Parks is interested enough in acquiring the property that they're willing to do all of these things at once,
And-
knowing that any one of them could theoretically derail, which would derail the whole process.
And the finalization of the park purchase is
Many months away,
many months.
the fall, probably.
So this is a baby step toward.
This is
the
a
whole.
giant step towards the whole, because there's no one for Parks to negotiate with unless this
Unless
corporation.
we do this, right? Okay, gotcha.
As for cost, it's in the resolution. Our best guess is that we're somewhere in the $30,000 to $50,000 range of needed expenditure within the next 12 months on the part of the corporation. So we had started at 50. We brought that down to 15,000 per municipality to get to 45. And then in conversation last week, there was some hesitancy as to whether one of the municipalities would want to come up with all 15, so we settled on 10. I think 10 is light, but it's a place to start. And realistically, our only costs initially will be, we will need to stand up, the corporation will need to stand up its own attorney. And then we will immediately, upon formation, we will need to buy officers and directors liability insurance. So those are really our first and only costs. until the park actually owns the property. So if we had, if we were gonna be managing the property this summer, then we would have a lot more costs. But Parks isn't gonna close on the property until fall.
And like you said, because this entity can take private money. We could, there's a possibility of fundraising.
Sure.
Or doing things like that where people really want to, they want to reach into their pockets to fund.
You can absolutely do that.
Okay.
But in order to get things moving, the resolution calls for the village to approve an initial membership fee of $10,000. Ulysses will be considering the same tomorrow. Covert is considering the same tonight. If all three municipalities agree, then we'll have a starting bank account of $30,000. Then we would need to file the actual certificate of incorporation with New York State. There's filing fees, public notification. So there's a couple $100s of startup costs, and then we'll have attorney's fees and insurances within the next few months. And then really there's no additional outlay of money anticipated until the fall, once Parks owns the property. My guess is it's probably going to require additional cash infusion early part of next year when we get into next year's budget season. So this will be an ongoing, until the property under management of this corporation is running at a profit. And again, that's subject to negotiation with Parks, what that looks like. My expectation is that there will be an annual outlay of money from the village to the corporation. And then when we get to a place that is probably running a business, right? So it's probably 3 to 5 year time frame where there's enough money coming out of that property's operations to potentially, the goal is to pay back the municipality, the municipal members for their initial capital outlay.
Thank you, that clarifies things a lot, I think, for some people, myself included.
It's not overly simple. I believe this is a first of its kind in the state structure. There are other municipalities who have contracted with Parks to manage a property, but they're a single municipality. And then there are other economic development agencies around the state that do all kinds of stuff. But none of them are directly contracting with a state entity to manage it. So we're kind of the first entity to do both. Or will be. Any other questions? Concerns? So then the next question is, who wants to be a director in this new agency?
I'm assuming we would just stick with it.
It's gonna
That's
take,
her.
it's gonna take quite a commitment, I mean, because we're looking at least 5 years of a commitment from somebody.
Well, we can change who the director is
Right,
Instead of an annual.
anytime, yeah, at least
Right.
annually.
I mean, we may need to. How long does this go, right? But
Right.
This is all on us.
being on the board, right,
Yeah, so there will be some. Side of good faith, which is the word
This is
that-
not dissimilar to the formation of the health consortium. Everybody ponied up money. The city of Ithaca and Thomas County ponied up a lot of money. But everyone ponied up money and elected representatives or appointed representatives to that board of directors. So conceptually, it's not completely different parts of state law, but conceptually, it's not very different.
I'm sorry, did you say you're going to, there's two, or just one?
Two from each board. So it looks like it's you and me again.
No, I'd be very interested in. Their person.
Well, the chairperson hasn't been established, so the directors will elect the chair.
Yeah, once,
Themselves.
right, once the municipalities have adopted this, then we'll have an organizational meeting and.
Yeah,
um,
because that's something I think I would be down the line interested too, as well.
So is that something you want to be a director? Okay, what about you? You still want to be a director?
Yeah. I mean, but I'm happy we can talk it through. See who-
Yeah, I would, only because of my involvement up to this point, I would be interested in continuing to be a director as well, so.
I think we should talk it through. We have to.
We have to appoint as part of this resolution.
Yeah. I mean, my inclination is just to follow through, right? I'd like to see it through, but I think. I know we'll get into that foggy question of like how long are we gonna be on this board, which is always touchy. I don't know how long.
When's your term up?
Wow, 2 years, 3 years.
Oh, it's long enough.
Well, if you two are both.
About you.
about it, it's- you can stick with it. I. Speak there, my. Sure, myself.
And we can have, I mean, we can still, like, we could all go to the meeting. If they are,
They are open.
so it's not as if. They're limited. It's not for purposes. No, in the same way that if we show up at a party accidentally, we're not there to conduct government business.
Yeah, I don't know how you argue with it.
She had also stopped by something that you would follow closely and you just share it on to the work.
No, I'm just generally very, interested in things that revolve around like recreation space, that kind of
It's a
thing.
big deal.
Being kind of part of that, outside of government stuff, but I don't have that strong. If you two are very much committed to the process. I totally understand that. Fight for a seat at the table. You'll represent as well.
Yeah, and in particular, I want to see this through to conclusion with the contract with parks. I think that's the piece where I want to make sure that there's a. I want to try and make sure there's a positive future outcome for the municipalities in operating this thing. It can't all just be goodwill and save the property kind of thing. Okay, then I will just, so that's okay then, Keith?
Yeah.
I'll just read this resolution into the record. For the record, that at a meeting of the Village of Trumansburg Board of Trustees held on the 13th day of February 2023 at Village Hall, 56 Main Street, Trumansburg, New York. Following resolution was offered and seconded, whereas towns of Covert and Ulysses and the Village of Trumansburg, together the municipalities, have collectively engaged in discussions with the state of New York and the Boy Scouts concerning an opportunity to manage the property known as Camp Barton for public recreation and other purposes. And whereas in those discussions, the joint creation of a local development corporation to manage the property known as Camp Barton was considered, as it would provide, among other things, flexibility and efficiency in management decisions and operations. Attorneys for the municipalities have prepared a draft certificate of incorporation and bylaws that provide a governance structure for a local development corporation, copies of which are incorporated herein as Exhibit A. And whereas the proposed certificate of incorporation and bylaws have been considered by the Board of Trustees of the Village of Trumansburg. Now therefore be it resolved that the Village of Trumansburg Board of Trustees hereby 1, approves and authorizes the execution and filing of the certificate of incorporation of Three Falls Local Development Corporation pursuant to New York State Not-for-Profit Law Section 1411. 2, approves and authorizes the execution of the bylaws of Three Falls Local Development Corporation. 3, appoints Gordon Hart and Ben Carver as directors of the Three Falls Local Development Corporation to serve through December 31st, 2023. And 4, that the Village of Trumansburg Board of Trustees approves an initial membership fee of $10,000 and appropriates such amount from unencumbered general fund balance to pay such fee. And be it further resolved that the foregoing acts are a type 2 action pursuant to the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act. And be it further resolved that the mayor is hereby authorized to do all things necessary and appropriate in order to effectuate the foregoing. Resolve further that this resolution shall take effect upon either the town of Covert or the town of Ulysses approving a resolution substantively authorizing those same acts approved herein. And I would so move. Any additional conversation, questions, discussion? Hearing none, then I would ask the clerk to call for a roll call vote on the aforementioned.
Mayor Hart.
Aye.
Trustee Yap.
Aye.
Trustee Mears.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor.
Aye.
Trustee Warren.
Aye.
Hey. Excellent. Now, how do I get out of that document? So weird. Okay, any other items of new business? And did you have anything additional for us as we head into our second public comment period? She's in another meeting probably at this point. Then I would entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss a personnel issue or 3 and collective bargaining subject to the Taylor law.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So bid everyone online a